Composing multiple containers involves adding another service to our Docker Compose file. Docker Compose will then take care of starting all the containers in unison. Let's go ahead and try this out by navigating to the folder in the code repository called Note-Taking App Persistent. This contains code for a note-taking app that's pretty similar to the one we were working with before. There's a Docker file that's identical to our previous note-taking app Docker file. There's a Docker Compose file. The only addition is that I added a container name so that we have a specific container name instead of a generated one. The only difference is that our server, instead of reading and writing to a JSON file, is going to be reading and writing to a Mongo database. So in order to get that up and running, we're going to want to go to our Docker Compose file and create another container that will run MongoDB. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and go under Services and add a new key called Database. So this is going to be all the setup needed for our database container. Instead of specifying build, we're going to specify an image to just pull from Docker Hub and then start running. I'm going to run the Mongo image, and I'm going to go to Mongo under Docker Hub and check out the official repository. And then I'm going to pull the latest stable image, which will be version 363. All right, and that'll be the image for my database. I'm also going to give my database a container name. We'll call it Note-Taking App Database. And then lastly, I need to do a little setup for my web application. So by default, Docker Compose is going to try to run all of these containers all at once. However, what I want to do is I want to specify that the database should be up and running before the web application tries to connect to it. If this isn't done, then the web application could error out because it can't connect to the database. We can do this by adding a key called depends on. We can specify a list of dependent containers, such as database. And what this will do is it'll tell Docker Compose to start the database container before we start the web container. That way, when the web service starts, the database should have enough time to get up and running. So let's go ahead and try this out. I'm going to go ahead and run Docker Compose up. And we'll see that it creates a couple containers, and you'll see log output for not only the app database, but also for the note-taking app itself. So we should have two containers running, although for our note-taking app, we are getting this error, URL malformed. And that's probably because we did not define an environment variable for the database URL to connect to. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the terminal. I'm going to do Control-C, and I'm going to run Docker Compose stop to make sure that our containers have stopped. And I'm going to modify the Docker Compose file one more time so that we define some environment variables. I'm going to do that right below ports. We can specify a key environment and then list out the environment variables we want to add to our container. I'm going to add the database URL, and I'm going to go look at the Mongoose documents. Mongoose is the client that we're using to interact with the Mongo database, and get an example of what the connection URL should look like. We'll see that the URL is going to have the host as well as the port that the database is running on. Now, one thing we will have to change is that instead of running running this application with the host being localhost, this localhost is actually going to be replaced with a different URL. So when running containers with Docker Compose, the host is actually just the name of the service. So we can replace localhost here with database. We'll keep the port the same, and now everything should work. Let's go ahead and try running Docker Compose up. And it looks like we have no errors under the note-taking app, and our database is up and running. If I go over here, access localhost 3000, we should have our note-taking app running. We'll see that there are a couple notes from when I ran this before. If you're running this for the first time, there should be nothing down here. And I can start typing in notes. When I click submit, we'll see that the note-taking app works just as before. I can do Control-C in order to abort, and then Docker Compose stop to then stop all the running containers. And just like that, we have two containers running in unison and communicating with one another.